Before I speak, I ask unanimous consent that Akash Singh, Immigration Counsel with my Judiciary Committee staff, and Robert Shiflett, detail from the Department of Homeland Security, be granted floor privileges for the duration of today's session.
Without objection.
Today, I come to the floor to speak about a recent tragedy that has deeply impacted my home state of Iowa, and I think all of the country, because of cable television, is well aware of this. Yesterday, authorities announced they found the remains of a 20-year-old University of Iowa sophomore, Mollie Tibbetts, of Brooklyn, Iowa. After searching tirelessly for months, state and local law enforcement announced the unthinkable. Mollie was murdered in cold blood. I'd like to commend the efforts of all involved in searching for this remarkable young woman, including the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, the FBI, Homeland Security, and the individual members of the community who volunteered tirelessly to find Mollie. Americans watch the news every night, all of us holding out hope that Mollie would soon be found and return to her family. I extend my sincerest condolences and sympathies to Rob Tibbetts, that's Mollie's father, and Laura Calderwood, Mollie's mother. They spent the last month and a half searching the state for their missing daughter. Rob and Laura traveled across the state, raised awareness on TV, and handed out buttons, T-shirts, and missing person flyers at the Iowa State Fair. Both Rob and Laura showed remarkable bravery in the face of the tragedy. Know our thoughts and prayers are with you and your family during this difficult time. Now, for those of us in Washington, we ought to try and learn something from Mollie's character and the example that she set. As Mollie's boyfriend, Dalton Jack, said, quote, "She's not just a missing person flyer," end of quote. Mollie was an avid reader who enjoyed the choir, theater, and writing. Mollie loved her friends and had natural ability working with children. Her friends say she had a gift to make everyone feel like the most important person in the room. No doubt her nurturing character and her ability to be everyone's counselor, as a friend put it, led her to the University of Iowa to study psychology. There, Mollie spent her summers taking classes and working at a day camp with the Grinnell Regional Medical Center, where she mentored children. It's no surprise that when Mollie went missing then, over 200 people showed up for a vigil in her honor. While we mourn the loss of Mollie Tibbetts, it is the duty of this senator and every other senator to act to prevent further tragedies like this one from devastating family and an entire community. We now know that Mollie was murdered by a 24-year-old undocumented immigrant who's been in the United States illegally for 4 to 7 years. That's right, 4 to 7 years this man was here undetected and unaccounted for. This raises questions about his immigration, employment, and criminal history, and we must receive answers. So today, I sent a letter to the Department of Homeland Security seeking any immigration history on this man and a briefing to better understand how he was able to get and stay in Iowa. This isn't too different than I've done many cases where some undocumented person, particularly those who had been deported and returned, asking for questions when there was a tragedy like what happened to Mollie. I think of recent cases within maybe the last 2 years about murders in Northern Virginia, murders in Maryland. The Tibbetts family then, the people of Iowa as well, and I hope all American public feel they deserve answers. Based on the information I do have, it seems this murder was preventable. Stricter border security measures, including increased personnel, enhanced technology, and modernized infrastructure, could have prevented this man from crossing the border. In other words, secure the border. Stronger interior enforcement and addressing weaknesses in E-Verify could have prevented this individual from working and would have allowed Immigration Enforcement Authority to initiate removal proceedings years ago. Earlier this week, President Trump invited officers and agents of Customs and Border Protection, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement to the White House to thank all these people and the people under them for all they do on a daily basis to protect Americans. Recent events are a stark reminder as to how much we need these hardworking men and women. Amidst cries from the radical far left to abolish law enforcement agencies such as ICE, I'm proud to stand here in support of the brave men and women of that agency. Customs and Immigration Enforcement are tasked with protecting the homeland, a duty they willingly accepted on behalf of all Americans, and of course the #1 responsibility of the federal government. Every day, men and women of the Border Patrol and of ICE, or you could say Immigration Enforcement, put themselves in harm's way because Congress tasked them with this great responsibility. So to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who call for abolishing immigration enforcement, I urge caution. We've heard a lot of that lately about abolishing immigration enforcement. Scapegoating our uniformed officers who are simply executing the law to launch future presidential campaigns only moves us further away from another one and further away from a lasting solution. To put their efforts into perspective, let's take a look at some data. During fiscal year 2017, ICE arrested more than 127,000 aliens with criminal convictions or charges. ICE made 5,225 administrative arrests of suspected gang members. Last year, the criminal aliens arrested by ICE were responsible for more than 76,000 dangerous drug offenses, 48,000 assault offenses, 11,000 weapon offenses, 5,000 sexual offenses, 2,000 kidnapping offenses, and 1,800 homicide offenses. And those statistics are just for ICE enforcement and removal operations. Last year, ICE Homeland Security investigations made over 4,800 gang-related arrests. ICE also targets illicit drug flows, human trafficking operations, and transnational criminal and terrorist organizations. ICE is part of our broader national security apparatus and often works hand in hand with our partners at the Department of Justice, including Drug Enforcement, FBI, and hundreds of federal prosecutors. In 2017, ICE identified or rescued 904 sexually exploited children and 518 victims of human trafficking. ICE seized more than 980,000 pounds of narcotics just last year, including 2,370 pounds of fentanyl and almost 7,000 pounds of heroin. To my colleagues who have spoken strongly about combating the moral stain of human trafficking or about ending the opioid epidemic gripping our country, I ask, how is ICE anything but an indispensable partner in this fight? How can we expect to combat the flow of lethal narcotics without the brave men and women of the Border Patrol and ICE? Just last week, I sent a letter to Secretaries Nielsen and Pompeo about an Iraqi national who lied about his active membership in ISIS and al-Qaeda in Iraq so that he could claim refugee status and settle safely in Sacramento, California. ICE played a very vital role in his arrest. This weekend, ICE deported a Nazi prison guard who was living in Queens, New York. And yesterday, ICE was immediately on the scene there in Brooklyn, Iowa, when state and local authorities determined the suspect was a foreign national. Congress has been dancing around the issue of securing our borders and strengthening interior enforcement for far too long. We've told voters that we'll fix the problem, but we don't seem to get the bills passed. But stories like Kate Steinle, Sarah Root, Kayla Cuevas, and now Mollie Tibbetts continue to appear in the news. And we ought to come to the conclusion that enough is enough. So I urge the Senate to put partisanship aside and support Sarah's law. That's just one that some of us from the Midwest have introduced. But we also would like to see justice for Kate Steinle's murder, because people that have been deported coming back into the United States to do this killing should, just for coming back and violating our law over and over and over by crossing into the country without papers, they should have mandatory sentences. So the Sarah's Law is the bill that I introduced with Senator Ernst in honor of fellow Iowan Sarah Root, who was killed by an undocumented immigrant driving drunk and 3 times over the legal limit. Sarah's Law is a common sense bill that requires the federal government to take custody of anyone who entered the country illegally, violated the terms of their immigration status, and had their visas revoked, and is thereafter charged with killing or seriously harming another person. It also requires ICE to make reasonable efforts to identify and provide relevant information to crime victims and their families. So I am thinking about Mollie's death, but you can continue to think about Sarah Root or Kate Steinle and others. We haven't responded to it very well. We can and we must do better.